I don't know about you, but I think this has been really quite an event. Cornucopia is a word that floats to mind, I suppose, a wealth of world-class information and first-class opinion that we will be mentally digesting for some time to come, so let me fail to sum it all up. Let me start, as I said at the beginning, by putting things in context. As Reed Hunt said yesterday, if you think of the fact that 2/3 of the world has never made a phone call, you put this esoteric, high-tech interchange of the past 3 days into some kind of perspective. I know there are 5.5 billion people on the planet, but when did you last hear from the other 4.9? Like the kid retorts when his mother says, "Eat your cornflakes, millions are starving around the world, name one." What I'm saying is that in regard to the rest of the world out there, perhaps the most important thing to be said about this conference on the future is that everybody here was in the future before we started the meeting. For the average person in the developed countries, in terms of how long it's going to be before they're living with the technology we at this conference already have, it's as if we were living in 2007 or so. For most of the old Eastern Bloc, 2015, and for most of the Third World, we're already in 2047. So let's keep that in mind when it comes to the matter of how things are going to go in the industry and its effects on the world, because when you and the speakers here expressed your views, you're ahead of everybody else out there. And what's out there is much more than just America. So that colors what I want to say in my summing up, because if the world described by both speakers and audience in this highly focused gathering we've had here is actually to come into existence, we all have to share in helping it to do so and to think about the effects of the predictions and, by implication, plans that were made here over the last 3 days. As I said on Monday, the future is not already there shrink-wrapped. We all make it day by day. You and your industry perhaps leading, and science, of course, and the labs all around the country, and the rest of the world waiting to handle the effects of what it is you do in a future that you are already structuring. So very briefly, what kind of world did the conference forecast? Well, first off, as one of the speakers said, people involved in technology tend to be optimists. I suppose on the ground that pessimists jump out of the window and are no longer involved in solving the problem. And in general, the majority conference speaker view of 2047 was, in the main, optimistic. Clearly, from a technical point of view, the feeling was that as long as you don't violate the laws, and maybe if you find new ones, the sky's the limit as far as hardware and software are concerned. The rate of diffusion of the technology is going to continue to accelerate, the cost to continue to fall, the storage capacity, the speed of operations, the amount of stuff on a chip, and the processing power of the machines to increase by orders of magnitude, while size reduces dramatically and ubiquity becomes the norm. And then beyond that, there's DNA and light to play with. According to the speakers, 2047 is going to be a world where computers will be invisible, embedded in everything from your bathtub to your brain. In this sense, they will be ubiquitous. Thousands of them will serve each member of society from their places of concealment, making it impossible for anything or anybody ever to be forgotten, lost, unrehearsed, disorganized, disfranchised, confused, ignorant, isolated, belligerent, unconnected, inaccessible, unnoticed, marginalized, or in need of a good story. It will be a customized world, according to the speakers. According to the speakers, it will be a customized world when anything you want will be manufactured for you alone by entrepreneurs that will be changing their identities and their company's identities and output and partners maybe every month to keep up with the constantly shifting marketplace that will be full of people able to gratify their slightest whim at the touch of a button or with a spoken command. And many of these people will, in 2047, according to the speakers here, be part of the fast-growing drift back to the countryside from the cities as telepresence makes it unnecessary to live together in a state of mass conformity. The amount of travel in intelligent cars may be drastically less as the same telepresence makes it unnecessary for people to meet in the same physical space, although it's possible that marginally greater leisure time that you mentioned might put more tourists on the road. Although even that might be less than expected, given the numbers that will be staying at home, cocooned in the latest virtual reality adventure experience, maybe even tapping into other people's life memories. The world of 2047, according to speakers who touched on this particular area, is likely to be politically fragmented, made up of nation-states perhaps on the edge of extinction, with regionalism rampant, functioning in constantly shifting political alliances, mirroring perhaps that of what's going on in the commercial world, but in this case, capable of delivering not a customized product, but a smart weapon. And if they don't own one, using the ever-generous resources of the internet to find out how to make one. So a world a good deal less monolithic than today's, and for that reason perhaps a good deal less stable, since the one thing that separatist entities or radical groups will have at their fingertips in such a world will be the enormously enhanced capability of organizing themselves and taking action. In 2047, the general feeling coming from the speakers is also of a world of extreme individualism, with a plethora of electronic servants capable of augmenting the individual's power for self-gratification, self-expression, self-fulfillment, perhaps even self-replication, although I myself prefer Patty Massa's alternative. Agents also capable of acting as surrogates for their hosts in everything from political activity to shopping, with the individual perhaps abdicating many of the old-fashioned rights and responsibilities in the process. Also, listening to all the speakers describe this world, the word again that kept coming to mind was abundance. After millennia of scarcity, of possessions, of information, of access to power, the arts, government, self-advancement, means of sustenance and comfort, the world of the imagination and storytelling, 2047 looks like being a time of plenty. Anything you could possibly want, and if it's not ready, tell the machine. And the necessary software will be written and the proper action taken before you can say Nathan Myhrvold. So overall, from most of the speakers, a positivist view of the ineluctable progress of science and technology towards 2047. The few exceptions to this I'll mention later. That's the speakers. Now for you. The audience has revealed in the sets of polling questions, first of all, those questions that some of you thought rather odd. They were from a poll conducted by Time magazine, ACM and others, of all national households back in 1971, and compared with your answers, there were some interesting differences. In 1971, only 58% of people thought that computers will keep people under surveillance. Now you think 90% of you think so. In 71, only 30% thought that computers would help to avoid war. Today, only 12% of you think that. In 1971, 46% thought that computers would dehumanize people. With you, that's gone up to 60%. In 1971, 38% of people thought of computers as a threat to privacy. 85% of you do. In 71, 49% of people thought computers would improve job security. Only 30% of you do. In 71, 86% of people thought they'd bring more leisure time. Only 55% of you do. Overall, the questions also showed that your opinions changed very little through the conference. You obviously came here with a totally open mind. The only significant shifts were that your expectations of job security went down by 10% through the conference, and your expectation, interesting, of electronic democracy went down by the same amount. A few of the one-off questions. By 2047, 90% of you believe that computers will not eliminate the gap between rich and poor. But 90% of you believe that they will improve the quality of life. So maybe that means that you think the gap is still there, but with rich and poor redefined upwards. I hope that's what you mean. 80% don't believe that computers will eliminate religion. 90% believe that they will not, by 2047, be as intelligent as humans. And over 70% of people don't believe that computers will help solve any population problem there may be. Overall, then, the impression is that you are not as optimistic as many of the speakers were, and that their words did not, in the main, make you more optimistic. Okay, the results may not mean very much on this scale here, but for the fact that, as I believe, this audience probably has more effect on what's going to happen out there than most. Right. Some last general remarks. The mission of this conference was, if I understood it correctly, to look ahead to the new century and to take the issue into the public arena. And if you've been reading the papers, you did. So what we have heard over the last 3 days could best be described, I suppose, as the beginning of a discussion. A very good beginning. As I said, the people in this room have a head start. For most of you, life is dedicated to the making and distributing of the technology we've been discussing. Nothing wrong with that. It's made us in the developed nations healthier, wealthier, better fed and clothed and educated than at any time in history. And no doubt this historic process will continue. But there were other considerations that this conference helped to highlight in the shadowy area between the technologically possible and the effects of its implementation, what you could call the social side of the equation. In terms of how easy that is to predict, it seems pretty clear that in regard to implementation and how to prepare people for the effects of that implementation on society, geopolitics, the biosphere, the various social institutions out there, by and large, seem to have adopted what you might describe as the skyscraper approach to things. That is, much the same attitude as that of the fellow who falls off the top of a skyscraper. As he falls past the 75th floor, somebody calls out to ask him how he's doing. The response of this chap, by now falling past the 55th floor, is typical of many institutions and even businesses today. It is to shrug his shoulders and say, so far, so good. Now, that attitude is perfectly understandable, especially if you're living in a specialist world where all you do is look at the bits. And in any case, moving outside your frame is fraught with room for error, and it leaves you vulnerable. Wittgenstein, the great modern philosopher, once described the problem rather well. Somebody apparently once went up to Wittgenstein and remarked what a bunch of morons we must have been in Europe back 500-600 years ago before Copernicus told us how the solar system worked, to have looked up in the sky and to have thought that what we were seeing up there was the sun going around the Earth. When, as any kid knows, the Earth goes around the sun, you don't have to be Einstein to get that. To which Wittgenstein is said to have replied, as all great philosophers often do, while searching for the right word, yeah, but, he said, I wonder what it would have looked like up there if the sun had been going around the Earth. The point being, of course, it would have looked exactly the same. What I think he was saying was that in any decision, you're stuck with what you know at the time. The trouble with that, in the case of our predictions here, is that at some point, some risk has to be taken, because there comes a point where, whether you like it or not, you have to move out of your box to prepare people for the social decisions they're going to have to make about what you're doing. Somebody has to do that. The best people to initiate the necessary discussions may well be those, as Murray intimated, with some relevant expertise, even if that expertise is highly specialist. People indeed like you. Because the social issues don't go away just because you ignore them. Follow through with the implementation of the technology, and you have to ask some pretty large questions. At the political level, for example, if we use the internet to dump representative democracy in favor of direct participation, will we get what people always say in defense of the present system, that the raw, unfiltered majority opinion always goes for the death penalty, for racial intolerance, for short-term get-rich-quick options, NIMBY, tariff barriers that keep jobs at all cost? At the artistic level, will we get a dumbing down as every amateur gets to flood the marketplace with fifth-rate garbage? And do we really want a world of home videos and illiterate scribblings and the kind of rock-bottom, untrained junk which that kind of self-indulgent, talentless, so-called empowerment of the ordinary individual could bring to the arts? And in science, how can the average high school educated person with the best will in the world and open access to global databases make much of a contribution to the decision about whether or not to spend billions of dollars in one or other avenue of Murray's research into quantum chromodynamics? In other words, will the new technologies bring with them a welter of mediocrity, vulgarity, mindlessness, and self-gratification, the like of which has never been seen because it was safely suppressed by technological limitations for all these centuries? Yes. But that's a yes in the old terms, from the years of scarcity when Michelangelo was unique because there was only one of him. What's going to happen, however, to standards when the word itself becomes an antique relating only to rarity value in a world without rarity? What new values will we espouse when the knowledge on which they are based is in constant flux? How will we each decide to behave when there is no longer one right way to do things? The plain fact is, I think that your technology is going to bring unprecedented rates of change to a centralized society not ready for them, trained by millennia of monolithic social structures, generated themselves at some point in the past by extremely limited forms of technology that offered virtually no freedom of action, and shaped by the view, still obtaining, that people need leaders to do their thinking for them, that the most valuable knowledge in society can only be specialist knowledge, that the only measure of intelligence worth a damn is the one based on a person's ability to pass tests of literacy, logic, and numeracy, and above all, memory. That the best way for people to fulfill themselves and lead a satisfying and productive life is to go to a place of mass work from 9 to 5 every day and define themselves by what job they do. The view that I think may have helped to bring the biosphere close to ruin with a consumerist use it or lose it approach to resources. So I think, socially speaking, the next few decades are going to make everything that went before look like see, spot, run. We don't know what new forms of social and business structures that technology will bring, because those human brains out there, increasingly networked, better educated, more productive, may come up with secondary level social applications that not even you thought of. But overall, on the basis of what we've heard here, what's coming, I think, can be characterized rather generally as a move away from the way it's been through history so far, with rules and regulations, everybody knowing where they stand, how they should behave, what to expect, to a kind of crazy free-for-all. Obviously, the key question will be, how free? The problem is, of course, at the most basic level, ever since the first stone axe, society has had to face the problem that innovation always goes faster than the institutions can keep up. Institutions of all kinds. Private entrepreneurial businesses always drive change ahead under the stimulus of a highly competitive marketplace, an environment in which most social institutions are at a loss. Social institutions don't seem to be terribly capable of seeing much beyond tactical intent. And yet we need these institutions if we are to maintain stability. Which is why, in a sense, this conference has just begun and not just ended. Because the discussion we've had here is the opening engagement with the issue of how to prepare society for the 2047, for which you may well have already laid the foundations. Because if nobody attempts to widen the discussion begun here to include the rest of the community, then, like the guy falling off the skyscraper, we are ignoring the significance of the approaching sidewalk. We urgently need to get everything talked about here and much more out into the public arena, maybe taken there, as Murray suggested, through qualified and articulate intermediaries, maybe you. There needs to be much more research by the industry and by the social institutions on the entire issue of the social processes and the way you will change them. And nowhere is it more important, as Eliot so eloquently said yesterday, than to work out what to do about these things in the field of education. Because it is in today's schools that the future becomes bright or dark. It is in the schools that those who will change society with your technology are sitting now in total ignorance of everything that has been said at this meeting, students and teachers. And everything follows from education. Whether we like it or not, a bunch of kids in schools today all over the world will be presidents, prime ministers, and leaders in 2047, and nothing can stop that happening. How and what they learn today will shape their use of power in 2047 and shape what that world is. I'll finish with this. In 1812, Jefferson summed up this conference much better than I have. He said, "I am not an advocate for frequent changes in laws and constitutions, but laws and institutions must go hand in hand with the progress of the human mind. As that becomes more developed, more enlightened, as new discoveries are made and new truths discovered, and manners and opinions change with the advance of circumstances, institutions must advance to keep pace with the times." Okay, Bob, on Monday you posed the question, what about the next 50 years? I hope the way the conference provided the answers was what you expected when you planned it. Thank you.